Thank you very much. So, thank you and welcome this afternoon. I think I'll just start very briefly with giving some background of what I'm going to present. There is a very small NGO in Norway working on trying to provide information that is relevant for people working with psychosocial work with survivors of torture, conflict, and other human rights abuses. We are a little group of women, most of us psychologists, psychiatrists, who have been working with victims or survivors of rape, both in conflict and outside conflict. And we have been looking into what is there out there of material, especially looking into mental health aspects of conflict-related gender-based violence. And we studied and got together quite a number of different both manuals, guidelines, very good, very fine documents, but very little of these contain any reference to mental health and mental health issues. I myself went through, I don't know how many reports and documents, and trying to look for mental, I found governmental, fundamental, but not mental in the sense that I would like to see it. So we started developing, based on some active training work that had been taking place in Congo over some years, we started developing something that could be a manual, something that could fly by itself was our idea, something that we could get the information together, but make it in such a pedagogical way that people can read it and use it without necessarily importing trainers from overseas or anywhere else. So the manual looks like this. It's quite heavy, but it's also online and on memory sticks, and I will provide you with more information about how to obtain one of these manuals. So I will start explaining and going through the manual, or just a presentation of the manual. I will not so much speak about gender-based violence as such. I'm trying to present to you why we worked on this manual and what it contains. So, based on very much the work that has been done internationally to combating gender-based violence in conflict, we saw that there was a lack of material addressing those who are being exposed to this form of violence and who seek help by persons who are very insecure as to how they can help at a more immediate level. We spoke to a lot of humanitarian workers, and they felt often very afraid of even starting to talk to people with such a serious experience because they were afraid of doing things worse. And we thought perhaps that by developing this, also being called low-key or low-tension strategies, it could be one way of helping humanitarian workers. So we have So I just wanted to show you that we have been using the manual or piloting while we were working on it in many different places of the world. We have been to Colombia, we were working in Jordan, we have been to Cambodia, to Turkey, where also Shahika was active in the training, and also in Norway. In order for us to have feedback from humanitarian workers and professionals working in the field about what should be moderated, what should be changed, how can it be used in a way that it is usable and accessible in different parts of the world. We are based on a human rights perspective. This slide is a very long one, but it's just to underline that this is based on a human rights perspective. That is, the human rights value is a very important underlying principle for all the work, which means that if you work with survivors of gender-based violence, it's very important to have this explicit human rights perspective in your work. The manual is constructed in such a way that you can, when it opens, it's almost like a manuscript. This does not mean that it's supposed to be read and used exactly as it is, but it's meant as one way of working. So on the left side, there is the information for the trainer. The trainer can read about why things are being done, why things are being said. And on the right side, you will find the text that is being said out loud and discussed with people in the training. So this can be used for trainings in groups where one trainer is actually using this manual as a way of communicating both knowledge about human rights violations such as gender-based violence, but also different forms of exercises and role plays and discussions. So all these are indicated on the pages. One of the important principles that we're always working with is to look into what is the good helper. And it's a very nice exercise to have people in the groups discuss among themselves what is a good helper in your community. What are the characteristics of the helper? And this, for instance, is the helper based on the drawings that were made in the Congo, where they, for instance, the good helper has to have a big bladder so she doesn't have to go to the bathroom so often. She needs a little mouth because she's not supposed to talk so much, but she needs big ears because she's going to listen a lot. She needs strong and big feet to stand very firmly on the ground, and she needs a big, big heart, and she needs a helmet also to protect herself because she will be exposed to a number of stresses. And she needs a big bag for all her tools and all things that she carries around. I could spend hours showing different forms of good helpers drawing from different places of the world, and it's quite wonderful to see how this activates people in the group to look into what are the specifics of our helpers. We use the metaphor, the toolbox, to illustrate that all helpers do have tools already in their box, but we hope that the manual will provide them with some new tools, first of all, like grounding exercises, relaxation exercises, and small and easy ways of stabilizing persons and making them able to deal with their own fear and anxiety and also trauma triggers. We use a lot of role play in this manual training, and for instance, we can give you an example of the first meeting between a helper and survivors, and then we have a role play going on in the room, and people are encouraged to come up with ideas as to how to meet the stressed and anxious person. And for instance, here you see that you can work in pairs to practice. One of you is the helper, the other one is the survivor. And we use the scarf to indicate who is the helper and who is the survivor. The survivor usually then has the scarf. And then we're very, very attentive to brushing off the role when the role play is over in order to come out of the play. Because even if you know you're role playing a helper, or even if you know you're role playing a survivor, it sticks to you in one way or another. And we also discussed again how it was felt to be a helper, how it felt to be the one on the receiving part. And these are exercises that are taking place during the training. We have in fact now recently done a training on Skype, or one of those modern ways, with people even in Aleppo and in Turkey and in Jordan and in Egypt. They were all sitting on their different television sets, 2 and 2, and we had this online training. We were sitting in Oslo, they were in different places, and they were doing the role plays, and we had the communications afterwards. Quite an extraordinary experience. We have included in the manual a very brief introduction to trauma. What is trauma? How do you understand what the trauma does to persons? What does it do to your mental capacity? What does it do to your body? And we explain such things as freeze and fight and flight, those basic reactions that we all know about. We try to explain how the situation that is traumatic is an overwhelming one, an inescapable one, and very frightening one. And also the lack of power and the loss of control, and how life and integrity is being threatened. and that most people will struggle with such reactions afterwards as intrusive memories, re-experiences, flashbacks, and sleeping problem afterwards. This is important also because we encourage those who are in the training to do some psychoeducation when they are working with survivors. As you see, sexual gender-based violence and trauma, it's a distinctive form of trauma because the violation involved is extremely invasive and gives rise to feelings of shame, self-blame, and guilt. And when combined with fear of being injured or killed, it is traumatizing in almost all cases. We describe important aspects of the trauma, how survivors can be triggered by other events that are similar, and that reactions can be very, very strong, even if the actual danger is not present. And again, this is very important to work on, because these are very obvious and, for us, very well-known aspects of trauma, but it's a great issue to make a point of this with those we are training, who are not necessarily psychologists or anyway close to having this kind of training, but maybe humanitarian workers or voluntary people working in different contexts. Yeah. We explain again the most common reactions, underlining the triggers, the trauma reminders, and the flashbacks, and how these can be recognized. And we explain stabilization and also do a lot of grounding exercises as to stabilization. One of those things that we can talk about a lot and do a lot of training about is how to get out of a very intense fear situation by looking around, naming 3 or 4 things in the room, holding a stone in your hand and clutching it very hard, very strongly, in order to help yourself to get out of an immediate or triggering situation and come back where you are. I think I'll go a little bit quick here because you can all find this on the net, but we also explain the window of tolerance and see that this metaphor or this picture may be a way to talk to people and also use it as a tool. The window of tolerance, as you all know, describes where people are comfortable in the zone between being highly activated and being hyper-aroused, and how we can explain how people so easily can come out of the zone where they can feel comfortable and be afraid, and how they can feel very wanting to withdraw from the world in a hypo-arousal situation. Using this and talking about the window of tolerance has given some very interesting conversations with people who are working out there and who have seen very clearly the changes when something happens and people move out of their window of tolerance up to a very highly aroused situation. We teach a lot of grounding exercises in order to feel here and now, in order to feel more empowerment, in order to sense your own body, to feel your feet on the ground, and we spend a lot of time exercising these different grounding exercises. Creating a safe place is one example of this as well. And I think one of the main points of the whole manual, we call it's the metaphor that we use, because we call it the butterfly woman. So the manual contains practical perspectives, tools, and exercises, as I mentioned, and the main tool of the manual, the butterfly woman, is a metaphor that we use to explain what trauma is and the trajectory, so to speak, of the trauma. So we start the training by explaining what we mean by the metaphor, that sometimes it may be easier for people to talk about somebody that's not themselves, something that we can create, a metaphor, this butterfly woman who's neither woman nor an animal, but it's a person or a creature with a lot of qualities that one can recognize, and also recognize the reactions following serious events. So this is the butterfly woman with in her good life. She has her memories of the past, and she has her plans for the future, and she is safely, solidly on the ground in her life. And we read the story as it goes on. And then the worst thing happens, because the story contains the element that she walks to the river to wash her clothes and to get some water, and she's raped by soldiers, and she's left alone, and it takes some time before she gets up and starts wandering, and then after a while she finds someone who helps her. But then what happens when the worst thing has happened? And using again the metaphor, it's a matter of creating so to say, the trauma trajectory, but in a very concrete and a metaphorical way. Because all of a sudden the future is gone. All of a sudden what was the future before is now only memories, worries. And the memories, the good memories, are replaced with the traumatic memories. So life is turned upside down, and we spend time discussing how does this feel, what does it mean when life is turned upside down. We use the metaphor again to describe the experiences of triggers and flashbacks sometime after the trauma, and also with text explaining this, and then how through contacting the helpers, coming into a health center, being respected for who she is, not being pushed to talk in any way, but being there, being told that these reactions are reactions that very often happens to people that are subjected to such violence. Slowly and slowly, she may find some way of feeling more in strength and in contact with herself and feeling the power coming back. I'm going very quickly through this. The training is for 3 days, so you can imagine boiling it down to 20 minutes is a bit of a challenge. So we have one aspect of that we discuss quite a lot too, that is when the survivor consider reporting. Because we underline in all our training that we will not necessarily encourage persons to tell exactly what has happened. It depends on the person, it depends on cultural, it depends on what kind of follow-up you can do to people. It's about creating some safe place, acknowledging the reactions, even explaining the reactions without necessarily knowing the details of the trauma story. But there may be situations outside of the helping context where people want to report to authorities, to police, to NGOs who have such things to do. And then we encourage very strongly that helpers are not in any way being the receivers of the reporting, because that's a different thing, but being helpers in preparing what does it mean to report, how can it be very tough to report, and how one can need help after one has reported to police or to any agency who receives such things. And then there's always the challenge about finding a good ending to the story. We try always to discuss this with the people we're working with. What would be the best thing to do? To have her come back to community, to the family? Would it be to explain to the community that such violence is taking place in their community, and that people must not be blamed for what has happened to them, how they can be integrated again into their own family? This is something, of course, that the trainers and those who are attending the courses can define for themselves. So when ending the story, we want to explore the notion of success and construct a suitably realistic ending. Not the super happy ending, because we know that there is not such a happy ending after severe trauma, but there are different endings that are better than the worst ones. And to clarify the many challenges that may arise for a survivor when she returns to the community, and what kind of assistance can make her return more easily and more successfully. And we must also be aware that many women would be marginalized and rejected by their families, depending on what has happened to them and depending on what they are, how things are in the community. So this is, as I said, is just a very, very brief presentation of this manual, which is divided in 3. It's first some introductory cards, and then there's the training itself, and then there's some resource material to be used to add up to those who are doing the training. So we do hope that you can look at this. You can find it on the net. You can find, I have some cards and some For instance, the toolbox we have taken out and printed as a document in itself. But we hope that you will go to the internet and you can very easily find it. It's free and it's downloadable, and you can download it in a way so you can have the pages turning like this. So I hope I've given you a little glimpse of something that we have found. We have found it useful after having tried it many places now, and we see that many are wanting to engage in this training. So thank you very much, and I look forward to questions when the other colleagues have presented their work. Thank you.
Il y a